The glass trembled slightly in the Tycoon's hand as the restaurant buzzed around him. Voices, clinking silverware, forced laughter. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing obvious. Until the Latina waitress froze. She had been confident all night, moving with silent precision, but her expression shifted the moment she saw the liquid sliding along the rim of the glass. "Sir, don't drink that." Her voice was low, urgent, almost a forbidden whisper. He frowned. No one ever dared speak to him like that, but when he looked up and saw the fear in her eyes, real fear, his hand stopped midair. The world around them kept moving, but between them, time didn't. And seconds later, when he finally understood what she had seen, what she had recognized, the Tycoon's face went pale. Because whatever was in that glass, it wasn't meant for him, and she was the only one who noticed. Carmen had learned to move like steam through the dining room, visible enough to refill a glass, invisible enough to never disturb the performance. Le Bernardin glowed that night, all soft gold and hushed conversation, the kind of warmth that looked welcoming on postcards and suffocating from her side of the tray. Her sneakers were hidden under borrowed black shoes, a size too tight, reminding her with every step where she did and didn't belong. She knew the smell of the place as well as her own skin. Butter, seared fish, citrus zest, polished wood still holding years of spilled wine and secrets. The murmurs of the wealthy folded over themselves like silk. Carmen listened without meaning to. Snatches of conversations about second homes, hedge funds, someone's divorce settlement. None of them ever looked at her face long enough to wonder what her life sounded like when she went home. Her section that night felt heavier, as if the linen-draped tables were anchoring her to the floor. Table 16 had sent back their amuse-bouche twice already, unimpressed with anything that wasn't tailored to their exact preferences. Table 9 wanted their champagne colder, then warmer, then colder again, endlessly fussy. Carmen smiled anyway, the professional kind of smile that never reached her eyes but kept her in good standing with the manager. She had promised herself not to cry at work. Not here. Not in a room where even the lighting looked expensive, where tears would feel like staining the decor. The day had started with an eviction notice taped to her apartment door, printed in clean, indifferent font. She'd folded it into her pocket under her apron, its sharp edges pricking her thigh every time she took a long step between tables. Carmen moved like a metronome, precise and measured, but her thoughts kept skipping beats. Her brother's voicemail replayed in her head. The job had fallen through again. Their mother's quiet cough from the other room, pretending not to listen. Carmen had promised she would keep the rent paid, keep the lights on, keep everyone fed. It felt like she was balancing 3 lives on a single tray of empty glasses. The sommelier glided past her with an easy elegance she envied, his hands cradling a vintage Burgundy, as if it were a sleeping child. He nodded at her in that courteous, distant way that meant he barely knew her name but appreciated her speed. She stepped aside automatically, shoulder grazing the mirrored column. For a split second, her reflection blurred between crystal and candlelight, a ghost woven into someone else's evening. At table 7, a woman in diamonds snapped her fingers, the sound sharp as breaking ice. Carmen was there in an instant, pulse spiking even though her expression stayed calm. The woman complained that her fork had a water spot, holding it up with offended precision. Carmen apologized softly, replaced it with a spotless one, and caught the faint smirk passing between the woman and her companion, as if her mistake were tonight's entertainment. Humiliation here was never loud. It arrived in small gestures like crumbs brushed too slowly from a collar or a credit card tossed carelessly into her waiting hand. Carmen had grown used to swallowing it, letting it settle somewhere behind her ribs. She would go home, rinse it out with hot shower water and cheap shampoo, and remind herself she was building something, even if right now it felt like surviving more than living. She remembered suddenly the first time she had walked past Le Bernardin years ago, still in her community college hoodie, backpack weighing down one shoulder. The host at the door had smiled politely while closing it behind a departing couple. Carmen had stared at the glowing interior like it was a different universe. She'd promised herself then that if she ever stepped inside, it would be because she was meant to be there. Technically, she was. Her name was on the schedule, printed neatly beside the word server. But there were moments, like when a guest refused to make eye contact or when a manager corrected her whisper for being too textured, that made her feel like she was borrowing the space. Tonight, the gap between the world she served and the one she went home to felt particularly wide, like a fault line humming under the polished floor. Behind the bar, the bartender lined up coupe glasses with a little flourish, the citrus spray catching the light in tiny bursts. Carmen approached to pick up a ticket, her eyes scanning the handwritten modifiers. Very dry, extra olives, no foam, less ice. Her own ticket for the night. 48 hours without sleep, rent due, mother's medication almost out. Had no such custom options. She took the tray, balanced it with practiced ease, and turned. A new reservation appeared at the corner of the seating chart, handwritten instead of printed. That alone was unusual. The manager's pen hovered over the name longer than necessary, his mouth flattening into something almost respectful. Carmen watched from a distance as he straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, and murmured to the host. The host's posture changed subtly, shoulders pulling back as if bracing for a different kind of weather. She didn't catch the name at first, only the reaction it caused. A ripple, quiet but unmistakable, moved through the staff. The sommelier glanced at the chart, then at the clock. The bartender slowed his movements, suddenly more deliberate. Even the usually unshakable headwaiter paused, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from his vest. Carmen felt the shift like a change in barometric pressure, the room's air growing denser around her lungs. "Carmen," the manager called, his voice smooth but carrying an edge that made her spine lengthen. She stepped over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He regarded her for a brief moment, the way someone might appraise a glass for chips. "You'll be taking care of the late edition," he said. "Special guest, discretion, precision, no mistakes." His smile didn't reach his eyes, but his warning did. Her first instinct was to refuse, to say she had too many tables already, that someone else could handle it better. But the word special clung to her like a challenge. Tips from special guests could make the difference between catching up on bills and falling further behind. She swallowed her doubts, nodded once, and forced her shoulders to relax. "Of course," she said. "I'll take care of it." That promise felt heavier than her tray. While she refilled waters at table 12, she heard one of the younger bussers whisper, "Is it really him?" Another hushed him quickly, but curiosity slipped between their words like steam under a door. Carmen tried not to listen, but the fragments kept finding her. Board seats, acquisitions, something about saving a failing bank during the last crisis. Whoever was coming, he wasn't just rich. He was the kind of rich that rearranged entire skylines. Carmen didn't follow business news. She didn't have time. Her world revolved around shift schedules, subway delays, and grocery prices. But she knew enough to recognize reverence in the way the staff said, "he," reverence, and a touch of fear. It made her think of childhood stories about saints and monsters, how both could change your life with a single gesture. She wondered what kind of story walked through those doors tonight. She checked her appearance in the reflection of the glass cooler. Hair pulled back neatly, collar straight, apron tied tight. There were faint shadows under her eyes from too many double shifts, but her gaze was steady. She pinched her cheeks lightly to wake up some color, then smoothed her hands over her uniform. No matter who sat at that table, she would be the same Carmen who took the subway home past midnight. The host adjusted the entrance candles, an unnecessary ritual he only performed for certain guests. Outside, through the frosted glass panels, Carmen could see the echoed shapes of cars pulling up, light bouncing off polished metal. The restaurant seemed to inhale collectively, conversations dipping for a heartbeat before recovering. She felt her own breath hitch in response, as if her body understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Her new table, number 21, usually reserved for last-minute power players, stood ready. Fresh linens, polished silver, a single white flower in a slender vase. Carmen approached it slowly, fingertips grazing the back of the chair as if listening for omens in the grain of the wood. She didn't know his name yet, or what kind of trouble followed him. But something in her chest tightened with the uneasy certainty that tonight wouldn't be ordinary. The moment Carmen stepped toward table 21, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations dimmed not in volume but in intention, like people instinctively listening without appearing to. The soft glow from the sconces stretched across the polished floor, catching the faint tremor in her hand as she adjusted the folded napkin. She didn't know why her chest felt tight, only that something in the air warned her to breathe carefully. She balanced the tray against her hip, letting its familiar weight steady her racing thoughts. The entrance doors glided open with a gentle sigh, and a cold brush of December wind curled into the warmth of the restaurant. She tried not to look, but curiosity tugged her eyes upward. A tall figure stepped inside, framed in shifting gold light, his silhouette both elegant and severe. Something about his stillness suggested he wasn't merely arriving, he was entering territory he already owned. Carmen recognized neither his name nor his face, yet the staff's reaction confirmed his arrival meant more than celebrity or prestige. The host bowed slightly, a gesture reserved only for individuals who could alter a person's future with a single conversation. Carmen watched the man remove his gloves slowly, revealing hands that carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to decisions with irreversible consequences. She sensed he was used to being both feared and needed, sometimes at the same time. He moved through the dining room with a calm that parted space around him. Guests lifted their heads, curiosity flickering across their expressions before they remembered their manners. Carmen forced herself not to stare, though her pulse thudded painfully against her ribs. She felt exposed without knowing why, as if he saw more than decor and wine lists. When his eyes briefly swept the room, she felt the moment graze her like a fingertip on the back of her neck. Her breath snagged. He had noticed her, not in the distant, indifferent way wealthy men often glanced at staff, but with a flicker of recognition she didn't understand. She pulled her gaze away immediately, cheeks warming with embarrassment. She told herself it was nothing, just the nerves of a long shift. Yet the sensation lingered, a question resting inside her ribs. Why had his eyes paused on her, as if he'd expected to see her there? Carmen approached his table with deliberate care, ensuring her steps remained measured and quiet. She placed the menu precisely at the center, aligning it with the edge of the charger plate. Her fingers brushed the linen, grounding herself in the routine. She whispered a greeting, her voice steady but soft. Before she could take 2 breaths, she sensed him behind her, drawing closer with the certainty of someone who'd been followed by significance all his life. When he reached the table, he didn't sit immediately. Instead, he paused beside the chair, studying the room with an expression both unreadable and quietly troubled. Carmen felt the shift again, an undercurrent she couldn't name but recognized instinctively. She'd seen powerful men before, but never one who carried a storm behind his composure. When he finally lowered himself into the seat, she sensed it wasn't comfort he was seeking tonight, but clarity. She began the practiced introduction of the evening's menu. But he interrupted gently, his voice rich and controlled. "Water first," he said, though the request felt like a placeholder for thoughts he wasn't ready to speak. Carmen nodded, her heartbeat stuttering at the sound of his voice. There was something else beneath it, a faint roughness, like he'd spent the day convincing people of things he didn't believe himself. She moved to the service station, pouring chilled water into a crystal glass. Her hand trembled slightly, not from nerves alone, but from something she'd been ignoring all evening. The uneasy weight of her eviction notice tucked under her apron. The folded paper pressed into her skin like a second pulse. She wondered if this man had ever felt the world narrow around him the way hers had today, or if crises for him came dressed in tailored solutions. When she returned to the table, she noticed a detail she'd missed earlier, a small burn mark near the cuff of his left sleeve. It was faint, easily overlooked, yet out of place on someone so meticulously styled. It didn't look accidental. It looked recent. As she set down the glass, she caught the faintest scent. Smoke, but not from a kitchen. Something sharper, darker, like charred paper or electrical wiring. A scent that didn't belong in a restaurant. He glanced at her hand as she placed the drink, and for a fleeting second, a shadow crossed his expression. Gratitude wasn't the right word. Recognition again. But recognition of what? She stepped back carefully, giving him space. Her chest tightened with unease, but also with something else. Curiosity threaded with instinct. She'd always trusted her instincts. They'd kept her safe in rooms where she felt invisible and exposed at the same time. As she moved to her other tables, Carmen stayed aware of him without meaning to. He ordered quietly, choosing dishes with the precision of someone who disliked unnecessary choices. Between tasks, she noticed him glance toward the entrance twice, as if expecting someone, or perhaps hoping they wouldn't come. His fingers tapped once against the table, a small restless movement that betrayed an inner tension he worked hard to hide. For a man so powerful, he looked profoundly alone. Carmen didn't understand why the thought unsettled her. She wasn't here to understand wealthy strangers. She was here to work, to earn, to keep her family afloat. Yet something about his isolation mirrored something in her, an unspoken exhaustion, a private fight carried in quiet motions. The realization softened something inside her, though she resisted it. When she delivered his appetizer, the restaurant's lighting shifted slightly as candles were replaced along the wall. For a flicker of a moment, the flame bent oddly in his direction, as if reacting to an invisible draft. Carmen barely noticed until she saw him tense, his jaw tightening in silent calculation. He looked down at the glass of water she'd poured, studying it with a concentration too sharp for something so ordinary. She didn't know why alarm prickled her spine, but it did. She followed his gaze, expecting to see nothing unusual. Yet the surface of the water trembled not from her movements, but from something else. A vibration she couldn't source. She lifted the glass discreetly, checking for cracks or unevenness. Everything appeared normal. Still, the tremor returned, faint but deliberate, like a warning she wasn't equipped to interpret. A memory surfaced abruptly, her mother's voice telling her that nothing in life ever trembles without reason. Carmen dismissed it, reminding herself that she was exhausted, stretched thin, imagining things. But when she set the glass back down, she saw him watching her carefully. He wasn't startled. He wasn't confused. He looked prepared, as if the tremor confirmed something he'd feared long before stepping into the restaurant. She stepped back, feeling the ground shift beneath the surface of routine. Her hands settled against her apron, fingers brushing the edges of the eviction notice again. But this time the paper didn't feel like the most urgent thing pressing against her. Something else had entered the night, something she couldn't name yet. The air around table 21 hummed with quiet, deliberate danger. Carmen took a breath, steadying herself. She had handled rude guests, impossible demands, heartbreaking shifts, but nothing had ever made her feel this specific unease. It wasn't fear exactly. It was anticipation laced with dread, and she couldn't tell if it came from the man at her table or from something approaching. She turned toward the kitchen to gather the next course, but stopped halfway as the head waiter crossed the dining room toward her, walking faster than usual. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed urgency. He motioned for her to pause, leaning in close enough that only she could hear him. "He's expecting someone," he murmured. "Someone who shouldn't be here." Her stomach flipped sharply. She tried to ask what he meant, but he was already turning away, masking concern behind professional poise. Carmen looked back at the Tycoon's table. He sat motionless, except for one hand resting lightly against the rim of his glass as if measuring its weight. His expression carried a quiet decision, one that made her heart tighten with instinctive warning. Then, for the first time, Carmen wondered whether she was serving a man in danger, or a man who carried danger with him. Carmen steadied the plates in her hands, though her pulse thrashed hard enough to blur her vision. The head waiter's warning replayed relentlessly, each word echoing in an unfamiliar register of danger. She had spent years learning to read the emotional weather of a room. But this felt like standing near a storm cell forming right above her head. She inhaled slowly, letting the familiar sense of butter and sea salt anchor her trembling thoughts. As she approached the kitchen doors, the heat radiating from inside collided with the chilled air from the dining room, creating a wavering current that felt strangely ominous. The sous chef barked orders, pans hissed, and laughter rose briefly from the pastry station. But beneath all of it, Carmen sensed an undercurrent of tension she couldn't name. She delivered the appetizer tickets, though her mind remained tethered to table 21 like an invisible thread. When she turned to leave, the dishwasher, a quiet man who rarely spoke, looked up at her with a furrowed brow. "You okay?" he asked softly, his hand submerged in steaming water. She nodded too quickly, offering a faint smile. It felt like lying to both of them. Still, she pushed through the kitchen doors, stepping back into the muted gold of the dining room where danger wore a tuxedo and sat beneath candlelight. The Tycoon remained motionless, his gaze fixed not on the meal before him but on the entrance. His posture carried the weight of someone who had rehearsed terrible news and was waiting for the moment it would arrive. Carmen paused several feet away, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt in his orbit. He turned his head slightly, catching her in his peripheral vision, and something in his expression tightened, as if her presence altered the equation he had been calculating. She crossed the remaining distance to his table with controlled grace, though each step felt calibrated to hide panic. When she placed the next course before him, she noticed the burn mark on his sleeve again. It seemed darker now, almost smudged, as if touched by something volatile. She inhaled subtly, searching for that faint smoke scent from earlier. There it was, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. And beneath it, something sharper, a chemical note she didn't recognize. He thanked her quietly, though the gratitude sounded mechanical, like he was speaking from a script rather than intention. His fingers brushed the edge of the plate without looking at it, his attention still locked on the room's shifting air. Carmen stepped back, giving him the distance he clearly needed. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow part of whatever circumstance he feared would unfold tonight. Two men in dark coats entered the restaurant, pausing under the glow of the entrance lamps. They scanned the room with discreet precision. Their presence wasn't loud, but it wasn't subtle either. They carried the tension of security staff without the uniforms, alert, scanning, assessing. Carmen saw the Tycoon's shoulders stiffen subtly, as if preparing for impact. Her breath thinned. Whoever those men were, they weren't strangers to him. The host approached them quickly, greeting them with formal courtesy, though his smile strained at the edges. Carmen watched the exchange, noting how the taller man spoke without moving his mouth much, his eyes never leaving the dining room. After a tense moment, the host gestured politely toward the bar, and the men relocated. Still watching, still measuring distances like chess players waiting for the board to settle. Carmen returned to the Tycoon's side, compelled by duty but also by something deeper. A nod of instinct urging her to stay close. He acknowledged her with a slight nod, the kind that carried unspoken meaning. She couldn't decipher it, but she felt its weight. It was the first time she'd sensed vulnerability in him, a flicker behind the polished exterior, a fracture beneath the surface calm. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked softly, though she regretted the question the moment it left her mouth. Staff didn't pry. They served, they smiled, they endured. Yet something about tonight blurred those rules, pulling her into a role she had never auditioned for. He lifted his eyes to hers, and for a moment the noise of the restaurant faded. His gaze held a depth she hadn't expected. Exhaustion, calculation, and something that resembled warning. "Not yet," he murmured. The answer chilled her, though his tone remained composed. It wasn't meant for her, she realized. It was simply the truth he could no longer keep contained. She retreated a step, absorbing the weight of his words. She'd lived long enough to recognize when someone feared a future that was already en route. Her family had known that feeling intimately, waiting helplessly for medical results, eviction notices, lost job calls. But this man feared something different. Not loss, confrontation, as if tonight was less a dinner than a battlefield disguised in linen and candlelight. One of the men at the bar shifted his posture, nodding subtly toward the entrance. Carmen followed his line of sight and saw a woman stepping inside, elegant, composed, yet carrying tension like a hidden blade. Her coat was draped over one arm, and her eyes searched the room with precise intent. Carmen sensed instantly that this was the person the Tycoon had been expecting and dreading. The Tycoon exhaled once, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't relief. It was resignation. Carmen felt her skin prickle, recognizing the emotional temperature of someone preparing for a conversation that would hurt, no matter how calmly it unfolded. She stepped aside as the woman approached his table, though she could feel the atmosphere tightening like a pulled thread. The woman stopped beside him, her voice quiet but laced with urgency. Carmen couldn't hear the words, but she caught fragments in the Tycoon's reply. "Not here. Too soon. You weren't supposed to come alone." His tone remained firm, yet beneath it Carmen detected something dangerously close to fear. The woman placed a small object on the table between them, a flash of metallic silver half hidden beneath her fingers. Carmen didn't recognize it at first, but the Tycoon did. His face drained of color, the reaction immediate and visceral. He covered the object swiftly with a napkin, muttering something low that caused the woman's expression to harden. Carmen stepped back instinctively, the air around them tightening into a fragile pressure. Whatever that object was, It had changed the night entirely. She saw the men at the bar straighten subtly, sensing the shift. Her instincts screamed that she shouldn't be anywhere near this table. Yet she also felt anchored to the moment by a force she couldn't explain. The woman leaned closer, speaking urgently now. Carmen noticed her hands tremble faintly, not in fear but in determination. She wasn't here to intimidate. She was here to warn. The Tycoon rubbed his temple, the veneer of control slipping for the first time. He looked older suddenly, weighed down by something creeping closer with every passing second. Carmen understood only one thing for certain. Whatever was unfolding, it had already spread beyond the boundaries of private business. It was threading itself into the room, brushing against her own life with unsettling proximity. She watched as the Tycoon whispered something to the woman that made her eyes widen with alarm. Then he lifted his hand toward his drink, and Carmen felt the world contract around that single motion. The instant his fingers brushed the stem of the glass, Carmen felt something ancient and instinctive rise inside her. A warning older than language, sharp enough to cut through the polite hum of the restaurant. The liquid inside shimmered under the candlelight, perfectly still yet strangely deliberate, as if waiting to fulfill a purpose. She stepped forward without thinking, her breath tightening in her chest. A single whisper formed on her tongue, though she hadn't chosen it consciously. Before she spoke, the woman beside him pressed her hand against her own throat, signaling a frantic, silent plea. Carmen saw the tremor in the woman's fingers, the kind that came not from fear, but urgency. The Tycoon didn't notice her gesture. His eyes were locked on the rim of the glass, reading it like a message only he understood. Carmen inched closer, her pulse hammering. The tremor from earlier danced across the water again, unmistakable this time. She leaned in just enough for her voice to reach him without others hearing. "Sir," her whisper faltered, breath catching. "Don't drink that." The word slipped from her with a gravity she couldn't deny. The Tycoon froze. Not because of her warning alone, but because the woman across from him reacted with a sharp inhale, her expression collapsing into something dangerously close to relief. Carmen realized, with mounting dread, that both of them had expected something to go wrong tonight. He stared at her, confused and searching, as if trying to understand how she knew something he had kept hidden. Carmen's throat tightened. She didn't know anything, not the truth, not the danger, but her instincts burned like coals pressed into her ribs. She stepped back slightly, careful not to alert the room. The men at the bar hadn't moved, but their attention sharpened, no longer casual. The woman whispered fiercely to him, her voice trembling not with fear, but fury. Carmen caught fragments. They acted faster, shouldn't have left it unattended, already compromised. Every word rearranged the air around them, tightening its edges. The Tycoon covered the glass with his palm, pressing down as if extinguishing an unseen flame. His jaw clenched and something inside him shifted, authority giving way to something colder, more calculating. Carmen felt the tilt in his presence immediately. This wasn't a man avoiding danger anymore. This was a man preparing to confront it. He gave Carmen a brief, piercing look, one that acknowledged her intervention while questioning it. She couldn't decipher whether he was grateful, wary, or both. The woman, however, studied Carmen with a different intensity, one that suggested her presence here complicated a situation already on the brink. The Tycoon straightened, placing the napkin carefully over the drink. "No one touches this," he murmured, his voice controlled but razor-thin. Carmen nodded, though a tremor raced down her spine. The woman pressed her fingers to her temple, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. She retrieved a sleek phone from her coat, unlocked it with practiced urgency, and typed rapidly. Carmen glimpsed a symbol on the screen, a crest she didn't recognize, before the woman turned it away. Guests nearby continued their meals unaware, but Carmen felt the entire restaurant compress into a single point around table 21. She sensed the shift the way animals sense a distant quake, not through sight but through vibration. Her attention flicked again to the glass. The liquid glinted under the candlelight, innocent until proven deadly. She wanted to step farther away, yet she couldn't force her feet to move. The Tycoon leaned slightly toward the woman, speaking under his breath. Carmen heard only one word clearly: confirmation. The woman nodded grimly, showing him her screen. Whatever he saw made his face drain of color. his fingers curled tightly around the napkin over the glass. Carmen watched him exhale in a steady, controlled release, the kind people use to stop themselves from breaking. He rose halfway from his chair, but the woman reached out, gripping his arm firmly. "Not yet," she mouthed. Something passed between them. Silent, practiced, deeply familiar. They weren't colleagues. They shared history, one woven with secrets that were now unraveling. Carmen felt intrusive witnessing it, yet she couldn't pull herself away. She sensed the moment was shifting toward something irreversible. The taller man at the bar adjusted his sleeve slightly, touching a discreet earpiece Carmen hadn't noticed earlier. He muttered under his breath, the words directed to someone unseen. His companion's posture stiffened. The two men exchanged a look that signaled readiness, not curiosity. Carmen realized then that they weren't just watching the Tycoon. They were waiting for a cue that might already be imminent. The woman leaned close to the Tycoon again, this time sliding a small envelope into his hand. It was thin, unmarked, and sealed with a strip of black wax impressions shaped like intersecting lines. Carmen had never seen anything like it. The Tycoon hesitated before tucking it inside his coat. She noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. Power didn't erase fear. It only taught people how to hide it. He looked at Carmen suddenly with a clarity that felt like being pulled underwater. "You sensed it before anyone else," he said softly. It wasn't a compliment. It was a bewildered observation. She flushed with confusion, unable to explain how instinct had overridden protocol. The woman studied her again, this time with the kind of appraisal reserved for someone who had unexpectedly altered a larger plan. Before Carmen could respond, a small metallic click echoed from the bar, quiet enough to blend with the ambient noise but sharp enough for her to catch. The taller man straightened, body taut with alertness. He touched his earpiece again, eyes drifting to the restaurant's entrance. Carmen followed his line of sight, expecting to see a guest. Instead, she saw the reflection of a third man in the glass panel, standing just outside, obscured by shadows. Her stomach dropped. The woman noticed him too. "He's here," she whispered. The Tycoon's expression didn't break, but his hand bolted toward the napkin-covered glass as though instinct demanded he protect it. Carmen felt the air tighten around the table, thick with impending collision. The restaurant's warmth couldn't soften the chill crawling up her spine. The entrance doors began to slide open slowly, releasing a draft colder than the night should allow. Light fractured across the room in sharp angles. Carmen felt her pulse roar in her ears. She tried to retreat, but her feet remained rooted beside the table, caught between danger and responsibility. The woman's breathing quickened, and the Tycoon angled his body subtly, shielding the glass from view. The man from outside stepped into the entryway with deliberate calm. He carried no coat, no visible weapon, nothing that hinted at threat, yet the room reacted to him as if instinctively aware of imbalance. Candle flames bent slightly in his direction. Carmen's skin prickled. The Tycoon's jaw locked and his grip tightened around the envelope in his pocket. Carmen inhaled sharply as recognition flickered across the Tycoon's face. Not recognition of the man. Recognition of inevitability. Whatever had been set into motion before tonight had now arrived fully, embodying itself in the stranger moving slowly toward them. For the first time, Carmen understood. The danger hadn't been in the drink. It had been walking toward the restaurant the entire night, and now it had finally stepped inside. The stranger walked as if he'd rehearsed this entrance somewhere else first, maybe in a mirror, maybe in a boardroom where people's futures were numbers on a screen. His expression was calm, but his presence pulled the air tighter with every step. Carmen watched the staff recalibrate around him without exchanging a word. Tiny shifts in posture, in glance, in breath. The restaurant had seen wealth before. This felt like something more deliberate, like consequence arriving dressed in a suit. He paused halfway to the Tycoon's table, letting his gaze travel slowly across the room. It brushed over laughing couples, clinking glasses, attentive servers. When it reached Carmen, it lingered just a fraction too long. Not with recognition, but with interest. As if he were cataloging the variables in a room he already intended to control. Carmen's throat went dry. She'd been invisible all night until suddenly she wasn't. He read the room like a ledger he owned already. The Tycoon remained seated, though every line of his body had gone rigid. The woman beside him straightened, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the approaching man. Carmen could feel the tension between them even from half a step back, like three magnets arranged in a pattern that repelled and attracted at once. She didn't know who the stranger was, but her bones understood something important. None of these people were surprised to see each other tonight. "Good evening," the stranger said, his voice smooth and unhurried. It carried the kind of accent that money picks up after crossing too many borders. He stopped at the edge of the table, ignoring the empty chair entirely. His eyes rested on the Tycoon with an ease that suggested familiarity, not respect. Carmen noticed a faint scar along his jawline, almost hidden in the dim light, a pale line that spoke of something once violent, now resolved beneath expensive fabric. The Tycoon's reply was courteous but brittle. "You weren't invited," he said quietly. The woman's hands tightened around her clutch, knuckles pale. Carmen watched the stranger's smile stretch, not with warmth, but with a patient amusement that made her stomach twist. "You don't invite inevitability," he answered. "You prepare for it, or you pretend it won't come." His gaze flicked just once to the covered glass. Beside them, the candles flickered as if listening. Carmen followed his eyes, her pulse skittering. For the first time, she understood the drink had not been an accident of service or a careless pour. It was part of a design she hadn't been meant to see. The stranger's attention returned to her, and she felt the weight of being an unintended witness in a script written long before she arrived. The realization chilled her, yet sharpened her focus like a tightened wire ready to snap. "Leave us," he said to her mildly, as if he were the one paying her wages. Instinct urged her to obey, to step away, and let whatever this was play out without her. But another instinct, older and sharper, held her in place. She had seen enough men give orders they didn't deserve to give. Tonight, something in her refused to shrink back into the wallpaper and pretend she had not heard anything. Her voice emerged before her courage had fully formed. "I'm responsible for this table," she said softly, evenly. "I don't leave it without the guests' consent." It wasn't defiance as much as structure, clinging to the rules she knew while everything else warped around her. The Tycoon angled his head, surprised. The woman's eyes flashed with something like approval, a brief acknowledgement of resistance in a room built on obedience. Her pulse pounded louder than the piano in the corner. The stranger studied Carmen for a beat too long, as though adjusting calculations to include an unforeseen variable. "Very well," he murmured. "Stay then. Sometimes observers are useful." The way he said useful made her skin prickle. She stepped back half a pace, close enough to hear every word, far enough to move quickly if she had to. Her heart hammered, but her hands remained steady from years of carrying precarious trays through crowded rooms. He turned his attention fully to the Tycoon, voice lowering. Carmen heard enough to assemble meaning between the fragments. "Board vote, leaked schedule, someone inside your circle." Each phrase sliced quietly through the soft music and polite laughter. The woman responded with restrained fury, mentioning breach, asset poisoning, contingency plans. None of it was language Carmen knew, yet the emotional math was familiar. Trust broken, stakes raised, no safe ground left anywhere near them. The stranger gestured faintly toward the covered glass. "They moved quicker than I expected," he said. "Desperation accelerates clumsy strategies." His gaze sharpened. "But that," he nodded at the drink, "was never meant for you." The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. Her mind raced back through the night. Who had handled the glass? Who had stood near the station? Who had eyes on which table when the order was casually placed and changed? She remembered something small, almost ridiculous. The ticket printer jamming for a second when the drinks were queued, forcing her to recheck table numbers. Another server had reached past her, fingers brushing the slips, murmuring an apology that hadn't quite sounded sincere. Carmen's skin went cold. That server wasn't on the floor anymore. She hadn't seen him in nearly 40 minutes, which in a place like this might as well have been forever. Her gaze darted from the glass to the stranger. "If it wasn't for him?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a thread. "Then who was it for?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. All three of them looked at her. The woman's expression shifted first, dropping into something like shock. The Tycoon's eyes narrowed. sharpening on Carmen as if she'd just turned on a light in a room he'd been stumbling through. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Carmen with unnerving intensity, the air between them tightening. In that suspended second, she suddenly saw the pattern. The seat assignment that had changed last minute. The handwritten reservation added to the chart. The way the manager had insisted she take this section despite others being lighter. The drink hadn't been meant for the man now guarding it so carefully with his hand. It had been meant for whoever was supposed to sit here before plans changed. A cold realization seeped through her bones. Earlier that evening, when the schedule was being shuffled, her name had been briefly penciled beside table 21, not as server, but as family meal comp, a rare courtesy granted when staff stayed too late. The manager had crossed it out quickly, saying they were too busy. Now the memory made her knees weaken. She swallowed hard, feeling the room tilt almost imperceptibly. The drink's placement, the timing, the handwritten note on the reservation, none of it felt random anymore. Someone had expected a different person in this seat at this time. Someone whose life wouldn't have caused a financial earthquake if it ended quietly between courses. Carmen's hands tingled with a numb, distant terror that left her strangely more focused than before. The realization steadied her spine even as it hollowed her. The stranger's gaze softened by a fraction, as if recognizing the direction of her thoughts. "You weren't supposed to be near this table," he said. It wasn't accusation. It was observation tinged with an odd respect. The Tycoon's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening as he processed the same implication. The woman covered her mouth, horror flickering across her features as the intended target of the evening finally became undeniably clear to them. Carmen's chest tightened painfully. She thought of her mother's cough, her brother's quiet resignation, the eviction notice burning a crease into her hip. Her life didn't come with contingency plans or security teams. If she disappeared, there would be grief, questions, maybe an investigation. But no market turbulence, no headlines, no board meetings. She was exactly the kind of person who could vanish without shaking the skyline that glittered above this restaurant. Her voice trembled when she spoke again, but the words came from beyond fear. "Then someone miscalculated," she said, eyes steady on the stranger. "Because I'm here. And I'm paying attention." The declaration surprised even her. For so long she had moved through spaces like this as if apologizing for existing in them. Tonight something inside her refused to apologize for surviving long enough to notice what others had ignored. The Tycoon stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a server, not as background. As someone who had stepped uninvited into the center of a dangerous intersection and refused to step away. Slowly, deliberately, he slid the glass closer to Carmen's side of the table, the napkin still covering it. "Then we don't waste what you saw," he said quietly, voice threaded with both resolve and unease. Her breath caught. The gesture wasn't about giving her the drink. It was about shifting the balance. By placing the glass near her, he made it unmistakably clear it didn't belong anywhere near him. The stranger's eyes narrowed, calculations visibly rearranging as he reconsidered the board. The woman exhaled shakily, relief and terror intertwining in her gaze, as if Carmen's presence had become both shield and mirror for their choices tonight. "Sir," Carmen began, but he cut her off with a small, steady motion of his hand. "You were the only one who saw it," he murmured. The tremor, the timing, the wrongness, his voice lowered further, meant only for their small circle. Sometimes the person with the least power in the room is the only one not invested in the lie. The sentence landed heavily. Unsettling years of quiet endurance she'd mistaken for necessity and safety. For a heartbeat, Carmen felt the larger room blur at the edges. Around them, conversations continued. Desserts were plated, champagne refilled with ritual precision. But at table 21, the world had narrowed to a single choice: expose the danger and invite chaos, or swallow it and let someone carry its consequences alone. She felt every version of her life vibrating in that narrow, fragile space between unacceptable options. She looked at the glass, then at the man who wasn't supposed to survive tonight, then at the stranger who'd arrived like a walking ultimatum. Her fear didn't vanish, but it rearranged itself into something sharper. Resolve. She lifted her chin slightly, shoulders squaring. "Then tell me," she said quietly, "what do we do with something that was never meant for him?" The question steadied her, even as it loosened everyone else's composure at the table. The stranger hesitated, a flicker of admiration crossing his features despite everything. He glanced at the Tycoon, then at the woman, then back at Carmen, as though recognizing that the axis of the night had shifted in a direction none of them had predicted. "We trace it," he said finally, back to the hand that set it down. "And we make sure they understand exactly how catastrophic their mistake almost became." Carmen exhaled slowly, nodding once. Whatever came next, she knew she'd already crossed an invisible line. She wasn't just serving plates anymore. She was part of a story that had tried to erase her before it began, and failed, because she'd been paying attention. Her humiliation, exhaustion, and fear were still there, but now, layered over them, was something else she hadn't expected to feel in this room. Undeniable significance. The agreement between them didn't need a handshake or contract. It settled in the space between their breaths, fragile, but real. Carmen felt it land inside her like a weight and a weapon all at once. She adjusted her apron with slow, deliberate fingers, as if grounding herself through the fabric. Around them, plates clinked. Laughter rose, and the illusion of an ordinary night tried very hard to keep holding itself together. The stranger slid his gaze toward the bar, giving the faintest nod. One of the men peeled away, moving with casual purpose toward the service area where tickets printed and glasses waited in polished rows. Carmen's skin prickled. The world of the restaurant had seams she'd never questioned before. Now she could see the stitches. Who moved where, who watched whom, who had access to the little rituals that could quietly end a life. "Walk me through the drink," the stranger said softly, his attention returning to her. Carmen swallowed, surprised to suddenly be the center of the conversation. "Order came through normal," she began, voice low. "Printer jammed. Another server helped fix it. I poured it myself, left it at the service station, turned to grab the garnish. When I turned back," she hesitated, replaying the moment. "The glass wasn't exactly where I left it." The Tycoon's eyes sharpened. The woman leaned forward slightly, every muscle attentive. "How far off?" the stranger asked. Carmen frowned, seeing it again in her mind. The small misalignment that hadn't registered as danger, only annoyance. "An inch, maybe 2, she said, like someone nudged it and put it back without caring how it lined up. Saying it out loud made her stomach turn. Carelessness and intent had never sounded so similar. The stranger nodded once, filing the detail away like a missing data point finally found. "Which server?" he asked. Carmen pictured the quick smile, the light touch on the printer, the murmured joke about machines hating Fridays. "Elias," she said quietly. Short sleeves, tattoo on his forearm. "He said he was covering for someone tonight." She paused, realization chilling her. "But when I checked the schedule, his name wasn't printed anywhere." The woman's hand flew to her mouth. The Tycoon swore under his breath, the word barely audible but heavy with recognition. The stranger lifted his chin toward his man near the kitchen. A message passed in a single look. Without breaking the room's rhythm, the man disappeared through the swinging doors, swallowed by the glow of stainless steel and steam. Carmen felt the restaurant divide itself, front of house clinging to illusion, back shifting into investigation. "You noticed he wasn't on the schedule," the stranger said. "When?" Carmen felt exposed, but she forced herself to answer. "When I clocked in," she replied. "I asked the manager about it. He said corporate had made last-minute staffing changes. I didn't push it. People get added all the time in this place." Her cheeks burned with quiet shame. She had seen the inconsistency and filed it under survival instead of suspicion. The Tycoon's gaze hardened, but it wasn't directed at her. Carmen realized with a jolt that his anger had a target now, and it wasn't only whoever touched the glass. It stretched toward the invisible lines of authority that allowed strangers into closed systems without anyone questioning why. "Who authorized him?" the woman murmured. The question wasn't meant for Carmen, but it hung in the air between them like a lit match. Behind them, the piano shifted to a softer song, the kind meant to make people linger over dessert and forget whatever waited outside. Carmen watched a couple at table 6 share a bite of chocolate torte, oblivious to the fact that, mere steps away, someone's attempted disappearance had been quietly interrupted. The contrast made her dizzy. Lives could tilt dramatically while others stayed perfectly parallel, never realizing how close they'd brushed to catastrophe. The stranger's phone vibrated once against the table, almost soundless. He glanced at the screen, then at the Tycoon. "He's gone," he said. "Elias left through the loading dock 10 minutes ago. No punch-out, no signature, uniform turned in but apron missing." Carmen's breath stalled. She remembered Elias wiping his hands on that apron, laughing about overtime. Had he walked past her carrying something she never thought to question? "Check the cameras," the woman said sharply, her composure thinning. The stranger nodded, already typing. Carmen's heart pounded. Cameras. Of course there were cameras. Over the bar, by the service station, in the hallway leading to the staff lockers. She'd spent years forgetting they existed. Another layer of surveillance she'd trained herself to ignore. Now for the first time she felt grateful for every cold, unblinking lens that might have recorded the small betrayal in motion. The Tycoon studied Carmen again, his expression less remote now, more human in its fatigue. "You remember details," he observed quietly. "Position, timing, distance." She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "You notice things when you don't have room to make mistakes," she replied. The truth slipped out before she could soften it. For a moment his gaze flickered with something like apology. Not for tonight, but for the world that made her precision a matter of survival. The stranger's phone chimed again, a soft vibration against the linen. He turned the screen slightly away, but Carmen still saw enough to recognize the grainy steel frame. The service station, captured from above, her own figure frozen mid-motion. Next to her, Elias's arm extended toward the row of glasses, fingers grazing stems with casual ease. In the next captured frame, her back turned. His hand remained, lingered, shifted one glass just enough to matter. Her stomach flipped. "You see?" the stranger murmured. "Careless hands don't hover that long." He zoomed closer, revealing the tattoo on Elias's forearm more clearly. A geometric pattern she'd always assumed was decorative. Tonight, under closer light, she saw something else embedded in the lines. The same crest as the wax seal on the envelope in the Tycoon's pocket, mirrored in miniature ink. Her entire body went cold, her veins suddenly full of ice. The woman cursed under her breath, realizing the overlap at the same time. "They placed him inside your supplier network," she said, voice shaking. "Not months ago. Years." The Tycoon's face blanched, his earlier composure fracturing at the edges. Carmen watched his hand tremble around the napkin. The first undeniable sign that power did not immunize anyone against violation. Someone had written themselves into his orbit long before tonight, waiting patiently to activate. Carmen's chest ached with a different kind of fear now, one that extended beyond herself. If this crest threaded through their world in ink and wax and backdoor staffing decisions, how many other rooms looked as safe as this one while hiding similar fault lines? She thought of the landlords raising rents, the clinics closing, the predatory loans disguised as help. Maybe danger rarely arrived as a monster. Maybe it preferred the uniform of structure and order. The stranger stood suddenly, his chair scraping lightly against the floor. "I need to make a call," he said. "This doesn't stop at your table." The Tycoon nodded, jaw tight. The woman exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. Carmen watched the stranger move toward the back hallway, phone already at his ear, his expression shifting into the calm aggression of someone accustomed to pulling threads until entire tapestries came undone in boardrooms and cities. Left in the immediate circle of light, Carmen, the Tycoon, and the woman existed in a strange pocket of suspended time. "You changed something tonight," the woman said quietly to her. Carmen almost laughed at the absurdity. "I only did what felt wrong not to do," she answered. The woman shook her head gently. "Most people feel that and proceed anyway. You didn't." The difference sounded simple. It felt seismic. The Tycoon loosened his tie slightly, a small rebellion against the armor he wore. "You understand this puts you at risk," he said. His tone wasn't threatening. It was warning wrapped in reluctant respect. Carmen swallowed. Risk wasn't new to her. It came with every delayed bill, every late-night subway ride, every decision to tell the truth when silence would have been easier. "I was at risk before I knew about any of this," she replied. The Tycoon's gaze darkened, but this time it wasn't with anger. It was with a dangerous kind of resolve. "Then we don't leave you where they can reach you easily," he said. Carmen's pulse stuttered. He turned the covered glass slowly, aligning it with the center of the table as if marking the fulcrum of their shared problem. They missed their target tonight, he continued softly. They don't usually accept failure quietly. The restaurant's glow felt thinner now, as if the walls themselves sensed the fracture running through the night. Carmen steadied herself beside the table, refusing to let fear corner her into silence. She had thought danger announced itself loudly with chaos or shouting, but tonight taught her it often entered softly, wearing a smile or a pressed uniform. The Tycoon's words settled in her chest, with a weight that felt both terrifying and clarifying. The woman leaned closer, her voice soft but urgent. They'll want to correct the mistake, she said, which means they'll want to erase the witness who caught it. Carmen felt the sentence wrap around her ribs like a tightening band. Yet beneath the fear, something unexpected stirred. Resolve, steady and unmistakable. She wasn't fragile, not in the ways that mattered. She'd survived more than anyone in this room knew. The stranger returned from the hallway, steps quieter, expression sharpened by fresh information. He placed his phone face down on the table, bracing his palms against the linen. We traced Elias, he said. He wasn't acting alone. Whoever orchestrated the switch is still in the building. Carmen's breath caught. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant performance, oblivious to the predator threaded somewhere among servers, guests, or staff corridors. The Tycoon stiffened, scanning the room not for a face but for intention. Carmen followed his line of sight, suddenly seeing the space differently. Each server movement, each lingering glance, each person who seemed too casual or too hurried. Fear pressed against her throat. But she didn't retreat. She couldn't. The stranger's next words left no room for illusion. They know the attempt failed. They'll improvise now. Improvisation meant unpredictability. Carmen's hands trembled despite her effort to stay composed. She remembered her mother telling her that fear wasn't weakness. It was information. Tonight, fear told her she mattered to the outcome of something far larger than the confines of this polished room. The Tycoon turned toward her, his eyes steady despite the pressure building around them. You stay with us, he said. No more distance. She nodded, though the instinct to run clawed at her. Running wouldn't save her. Understanding might. What exactly did I interrupt? She asked, voice low. The Tycoon hesitated, weighing the cost of truth. The stranger answered instead. A hostile acquisition, he said. Not of a company. Of a person. Carmen blinked, confused. He clarified softly. Destroy the man. Destroy the empire he shields. It's efficient, in a cruel way, the woman added quietly. But they misread the timing, and they misread you. The idea that she, a server with overdue rent and worn shoes, had disrupted a strategy worth millions, made Carmen's stomach twist. But another feeling rose beneath the disbelief. Pride, sharp and unfamiliar. She had spent years feeling small in rooms like this. Tonight her instincts had torn a hole through someone else's precision. A sudden crash echoed from the back hallway, metal striking tile followed by hurried footsteps. The stranger spun toward the sound, signaling to his man at the bar. The piano faltered, fingers slipping from the keys. Conversations hiccuped mid-sentence. Carmen's body reacted before her mind did. She stepped back toward the Tycoon and the woman, positioning herself between them and the approaching hall without knowing why. A server burst into view, panting, eyes wide. Not Elias, but someone Carmen recognized from earlier shifts. He scanned the room, frantic and disoriented, before security intercepted him. Storage room, he gasped. Someone cut the lights. I heard something fall. The stranger moved instantly, disappearing toward the hallway with the precision of someone who navigated conflict professionally. Carmen gripped the side of the table, trying to anchor herself in the rising storm. The Tycoon touched her arm lightly, a gesture that steadied more than startled. You don't have to be brave for us, he murmured. She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance burning through her fear. I'm not being brave for you, she said. I'm being brave because someone expected me not to be. The woman watched her with something close to admiration, as if recognizing a kind of courage she'd almost forgotten existed. Minutes stretched, taut and breathless. The stranger returned, expression unreadable. They fled, he said, through the employee stairwell. But they left something behind. He placed an object on the table, a small metallic capsule, no bigger than a thumb, engraved with the same geometric crest Carmen had seen inked on Elias's skin. Her breath hitched. It was identical to the seal on the envelope. Patterns weren't accidents. They were signatures. This was their backup plan, the stranger said. Silent. Quick. Disguised as kitchen equipment. Carmen's skin pricked at the thought of how close the capsule had likely been to activation. The Tycoon exhaled slowly, years of control thinning at the edges. The woman closed her eyes briefly, grief flickering across her features. Not grief for a person, but for trust shattered in places difficult to mend. Carmen stared at the capsule, fear returning as a cold, clean thread. What happens now? She whispered. The Tycoon leaned back, rubbing his jaw. Now, he said, we dismantle their network, quietly, thoroughly. He paused, voice softening. And we protect you. Carmen's heart tightened at the unexpected inclusion. Protection had never been something she associated with wealth. It often meant distance, not care. Tonight it meant responsibility. The stranger folded the napkin off the poisoned drink, sliding the glass toward Carmen once more. This is evidence now, he said. And the fact that you noticed what others didn't, that's not luck. That's instinct. She swallowed hard. For years, she'd believed instinct was something she used merely to avoid humiliation or mistake. Now it had saved 3 lives and preserved a balance of power she hadn't known existed. The woman reached for Carmen's hand, squeezing it softly. You altered the trajectory of a very dangerous evening, she murmured. Carmen didn't know what to say. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't shrinking beneath the gaze of people who lived entire universes separate from hers. She stood level with them, not by wealth, not by status, but by impact. The Tycoon rose slowly, adjusting his coat. Come with us, he said gently. We can't leave you unguarded tonight. Whoever set this in motion will not like how it ended. Carmen hesitated, glancing around the dining room. The tables, the candlelight, the hum of conversations reclaiming their rhythm. Her world here had been built on survival. But outside this restaurant, a different world had just opened its doors to her. She exhaled, a quiet acceptance threading through her. All right, she whispered. She followed them toward the exit, passing through pockets of warmth and cold drafts from the door. As they stepped outside, the city stretched before her, restless, immense, unfamiliar. But she didn't feel swallowed by it. Not tonight. Something fierce had awakened inside her, something that refused to be overlooked or erased again. The Tycoon paused beside her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You changed the ending, he said. For all of us. Carmen looked at him, the weight of the night finally settling into her bones. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one truth now, clear and unwavering. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the only one that can stop the world from breaking.